let's just get all the failures out of the way first so that good stuff can happen.
So in 1973, you started your career as a computer operator. What was your day-to-day like in that first job right after trade school?
It really didn't last long that I was in computer operations. I went to a 9-month trade school that quickly, like almost from the first day, I was way ahead of the class. I was it was like an addiction. I just had to be on the machine. And so I was almost independent of the class by the second day. I just looked at it as free computer time. I mean, in real life, I was paying. I got a government loan to go to school, and which I wound up paying $47 a month for like 10 years. But it was great having time on a computer. And the class started with, in those days, programming, you still were doing wiring literally of boards. There were, it was called a 407 accounting machine or something, and then keyboards. I spent a lot of time programming keyboards to read punch cards. And then there was one machine that used a language called RPG that I programmed on. And that was really cool because suddenly, you could really run programs and get printouts, and it was like a real computer. So but graduating from school, even at the top of the class, I had to start as a computer operator. But I don't remember, and I was working for Burroughs. They were a computer company at the time. And from the day I accepted the job there, I was trying to figure out how to get into their programming group. And I think I did get in. It's funny, I don't remember too much about that because even then I wasn't there very long before I got another job programming an assembler. And I suspect in the first 3 years of my career, I probably changed jobs 5 times. It was kind of like every time I would get a job, I would try for a better job. And programming in those days, it's funny, the whole industry is in kind of a slump now. I'd hate to be looking for a programmer job. But in those days, if you could code, you were suddenly getting phone calls every day, especially in Los Angeles, where I was, saying, please come to work. We'll give you more than you're making now. And we'll give you a $2,000 signing bonus. And the fact that I had changed jobs so often didn't bother anybody. They just needed to find a programmer, and there weren't many in Los Angeles at that time. So I got away with stuff you probably couldn't get away with today. And then I started working for kind of everybody in LA because there was just such demand that even in those days, I think I was charging, it sounds like nothing now, but I was charging like $35 an hour, which, what would that be, almost 50 years ago? You could seem like a lot of money. And I would work days, and then I would work 3 other places at night, and not sleep much. But on weekends, Roberta and I had a deal where Saturday was hers and Sunday was for the kids. And so I protected those 2 days, and then during the week, it was like get up early and work until time to fall into bed. And that was particularly tough in LA, where the freeways are tough to move around on, even then. So, but that worked for me because I got very varied experience and was able to work on big online networks in the years before there were personal computers or anybody ever dreamed of the internet. I was working on something called IMSDC and CICS on big mainframe IBM computers, and was kind of a specialist in it and well sought out in the Los Angeles area.
Wow.
Long answer to a short question. Sorry, I rambled.
I love long answers. Keep them coming. Now, you talked about the first computer game you played in your highly recommended book, Not All Fairy Tales Have Happy Endings, which I've read numerous times since it came out.
Thank you.
An amazing read. So when you were playing the game, which was Star Trek, did it ever cross your mind to use the technical skills you've acquired to create entertainment software?
When I played that game was before I had even gone to Control Data Institute, the trade school. It was in a high school trip of some sort to go to UCLA. So at that time, I don't think I guess I don't know what I thought. I remember being blown away by it and thinking that this had to be my future. But, I was so far removed from that universe, I don't think I could have ever imagined I would someday program computers on my own. It just seemed like this magic, that was happening. And then when I went to the trade school, I don't think I ever thought of games. Even when we did our first game, it was really done to humor Roberta, because she wanted to do a game. There's no part of me that's fun. I mean, really, I'm kind of a business-centric, code-centric kind of guy. And Roberta's kind of the playful one in the family. And I was hard at work trying to build Microsoft at that point. Bill Gates had released, what was it called? Microsoft Basic. And Microsoft was starting to do well. And I said, look, there's money over there. And I wanted some of that. So I decided I was going to build Fortran, because at my most recent job, I had been programming in Fortran. And I started work on a Fortran compiler. And and I had a compiler development background at that point. And I considered compilers kind of the highest form of code. If you could build the language that builds languages, then you're a super programmer, I guess is how I thought of it. So I started on Fortran, and I think I even started for the TRS-80 that we used to call the Trash 80, using cassette tape. And then Roberta bought me a Apple II for Christmas, and I started working on Fortran for the Apple II, and then she had her idea that maybe we could do a game, and happy wife, happy life. So I figured I'd spend a little bit of my time working on her stupid game, and then it turned out that nobody cared about my compiler and everybody loved her game, and Sierra was born.
So. Mystery House was created using extremely limited technology, and in the book you talk about the tools you used. You talked about VersaWriter to digitize art, and you managed to fit all of the game code and 70 plus images onto a single Apple II floppy disk. And you've done all of this using assembly language. Kudos. Now, given these constraints, why did you choose to fit everything onto a single disk rather than use multiple floppy disks? Was it a technical necessity, a cost consideration, or was it just a fun challenge?
Yeah, it's a fun question. I wonder why I didn't think, well, we could have spread it across multiple floppies. I guess... I don't know, it was so, after working on cassette tape, to suddenly have a floppy disk and 80K, which was more than would have fit on an entire cassette tape, I think, it felt like I had all the room in the world and I should be able to fit within it. And so I don't know, yeah, probably I could have spread it to multiple floppies, although the operating system wasn't super intelligent in those days. You booted into a game. You didn't have an operating system and then go run. You put in the floppy, powered on the machine, and up popped the game. So I guess I don't remember whether or not there would have been possible to say, please insert disk 2. Instead, I'd never heard the word vector graphics, and I can't tell you if it existed at the time, but I did vector graphics, and that's how I was able to cram the pictures in. And I think it was an 80K floppy, and later somebody realized you could turn it over and get 160K. But at that point, all I really had to work with was 80K, and the operating system, such as it was, had to fit on the floppy. So there wasn't a lot of space available. And, in terms of firsts, it was certainly the first vector graphics on an Apple computer. And it was the first, there was something else that was new that we did. Well, it was probably the first game engine, because rather than building a game, I mentally I'd been programming a language called RPG, which was kind of a fill-in-the-blanks programming language. And partially because I didn't want to have to code the game, I wanted Roberta to build the game. So my focus was on how do I build her the tools to be able to build the game so I can work on my compiler. And so I tried to build something which would be kind of a fill-in-the-blanks type programming language that she could work with, and I gave her an art tool so that she could do the art, and then I went back to doing what I considered real work on my compiler. And Roberta built Mystery House pretty much on her own, and she wasn't a programmer. She had done a little bit of programming, although she'd be the first to admit that she got a job as a COBOL programmer, but was a terrible COBOL programmer, and instead she would bring home her work and I would code it, and it worked. It worked for her. But she only did that, I think, for 60 days or something. She didn't really like it. But so she had a little bit of a programming background, and so she wasn't a total novice. And when I gave her a simple, it was more like an Excel spreadsheet where she could say, this is room 1, and in room 1 it recognizes this verb and this noun, and it interacts with this inventory object, and if this happens, then it triggers that event. And so it was kind of the first primitive, very primitive game engine and first use of vector graphics, and that allowed us to build a game, and allowed the game to be built by a non-techie. So all of which was good stuff. But there were no tools. I mean, people don't appreciate that there was no understanding at that point that someday computers could do sound, that there was such a thing as an animation editor, and there was such a thing as animation. I mean, it was really a blank sheet of paper. And whereas I would like to think that I was a boy genius or something, it was really just no matter what you did, since nobody had done it before, it would be impressive automatically. So there's a lot to be said for getting there first.
Well, first, and nowadays apparently COBOL developers are in high demand because there are many legacy banking systems that still run on COBOL and nobody knows it. So
yeah, and I would imagine that it's probably hard to find programmers because they probably don't want to code in COBOL. I remember it is a pretty lame language. So.
Yeah, those who did program in COBOL don't want to program in COBOL nowadays, and younger developers never learned it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, code's code, though. It's pretty easy to move from language to language, although employers don't always believe that. It's funny, they have the computers that will now screen resumes, and they'll look for experience in a particular technology when, if you can break through and talk to a human, I mean, in real life, you either got it or you don't. If you understand, I never let experience when I was hiring in a particular language bog things down. I mean, it's really either you either understand how the machine works and how to whip it into shape, or you don't. And particular language or particular package, what do you want to call it, API, you learn those. I mean, maybe you've got a week of downtime while you spin up to speed, but or a month of downtime while you spin. But it's better to invest a month in a person with potential than look for somebody that's been coding in exactly that language and may or may not have potential. So.
Yeah, and in the Sierra days, some of the programmers actually worked on building the engine, but most of them had to learn the proprietary engine you had, either AGI or SCI, so They needed the skills, not the knowledge.
Yep. Yeah, we were divided into two different groups. One that was people that, I guess I'd call them superstars that could code in C or C++, or actually I think in those days it was probably assembler. And then there was the game developers themselves that were coding in AGI or SCI. And just like part of the reason we used a game engine, one was platform independence, but the other was that I wanted to be able to involve creative people in the process who weren't necessarily superstar programmers. I mean, today, to use a game engine, you really do have to be a pretty superstar programmer. It's not easy to code in Unreal or Unity. It can be, deceptively simple, but as soon as you start trying to create a real game, it's big boy league. It's not easy. And but Sierra's philosophy, or at least mine, was to try to bring creative people as close to the product as possible. And like Al Lowe coded his own games. Roberta was heavily involved in the code on her games. I don't know if it's because it was a small company, but it just felt right to me that the closer I could bring the creative person to the product, the better. And that's all. I don't know. I mean, the game engine was partially to allow non-coders to build games. So, and our early developers were not software developers. They were just good, creative people who had a sense of humor or passion for the topic. So.
Well, nowadays you have ChatGPT helping non-developers make games without them knowing how to code.
It is weird how useful ChatGPT is. I hit recently where I had to do some programming in languages I had never heard of, like React and some of this crazy stuff. Dart. What's the other one I was programming? Flutter. And even I used to code in jQuery, and I had to write some stuff in jQuery recently. I hadn't done it in 8 years, something like that. But what I do is I type into ChatGPT what I want, but it generates the code, and then I remember enough, or it could kind of sort it out. And I've done things that would have taken a month in the old days in a day, because I'm able to, I guess I don't have ChatGPT develop an application, although probably it could, but I have it, help me get started, help me solve bugs. I'm typing then error messages to ChatGPT and say, what did I screw up? And it's unbelievable. I just really don't understand how that can work. So I'm glad that I'm here to see this next evolution of the industry.
Yeah, and the most interesting part is that you can copy the code as is and not learn anything, or you can actually learn the process. So for example, you can use prompts like, I'm a JavaScript developer and I'm trying to understand this Swift code or this Java code or this Kotlin code, and explain it to me like I'm a developer, or explain it to me like I'm 5. If you actually want to learn about the inner workings.
It seems so impossible, but it does it. And it's funny how many programmers haven't figured that out yet. When I talk to guys on my team, and I'll tell them, go to ChatGPT, and they'll say, well, ChatGPT is wrong sometimes. I'll say, don't worry about it. Just use it, and recognize once in a while it might be wrong, but it's not like programmers always right on the first try. I mean, do it, and it's incredible. I mean, it's just a huge time saver. So.
Well, up until a few months ago, it didn't have the sources of the answers ChatGPT would give you. So ChatGPT would be overly confident and would tell you something, whether it was correct or not, it was up to you to find out. But since then, they changed it, and it can search the web. So when it gives you an answer, it tells you the websites that were indexed at the time in order to give that answer. And so you can use that to determine whether or not the answer is correct, just like you determine whether or not an answer is correct by looking at Google results and choosing the correct website. So things have changed in the past couple of months.
I wonder if in the current legal, there's going to be lots of lawsuits against ChatGPT for plagiarism, and we'll see how those sort out. Maybe ChatGPT will get dumber. I can't imagine that. I don't know. We're living in interesting times. So.
True. But back to the 80s.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, you expressed concerns about Sierra being pigeonholed as an adventure game company. So first of all, there's nothing wrong with that. Some of my best friends are adventure game companies. But when you started having these concerns, what were the first steps you took to diversify Sierra's portfolio and expand into new genres?
Well, I don't remember when I started. I'm a paranoid sort. I kind of worry more about what can go wrong than what goes right. And when we were on top of the world, I'd look at the bestseller chart and I'd see, 7 out of the top 10 in the industry being Sierra, and they were all adventure games. And I knew deep in my soul that that kind of game couldn't become truly mass market. They're too hard, too expensive to develop. It just felt wrong. I don't know why. I just knew that there was a funny time in computers at the beginning where parents thought computers were super educational, and all they could dream of was having enough money to get their kids a computer because they figured their kids would grow up and go to college. It was kind of a funny time, and the kids that were playing games and the whole way computer gaming was looked at in those days was different. And our adventure games worked, but I didn't feel like that was going to be, the finish line. I knew that there was going to be other kinds of games, and actually even non-games. I always thought that, like the iPod was the product we should have done. That, I would tell everybody that computers are a superset of books, movies, and records, and that someday it would, basically eat those other industries. And we're getting closer to that. And so it was that core vision that kind of was stepping us along. And so I knew that I had to go well beyond adventure games. And certainly, almost immediately I started thinking, how can I branch into other areas? But I had a company in which all of my people thought adventure games. And so I knew I had to do acquisitions or work with other developers to get what I wanted. And that kind of led to our acquisition strategy. And, and I acquired, if you look at the acquisitions we did, I acquired a company that did golf games, a company that did race car games, a company that did flight simulators. I acquired a couple of companies in educational software. I figured we were number one in entertainment. We had to be number one in education. So I went there. But it's funny that we're not remembered really for anything except our adventure games. And toward the end, probably our adventure games were, although it depends. We sold an awful lot of Phantasmagoria and King's Quest. And if you took those two out, then the vast majority of our revenue was in probably in simulators between NASCAR and the Dynamics products. And actually we did really well in education. We may not have been number one in the world in education, but we were number one in some places. So, I don't know. Sorry, I'm meandering again.
No, keep doing that. Any tangents you go on are fine by me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, you clearly have a deep passion for software development, and it's evident in the fact that you still had programming credits on games like Police Quest and Space Quest, but at the same time, you were also running a very large business. how did you balance your desire to stay hands-on with the increasing demands of leading a fast-growing company like Sierra?
Yeah, I was lucky in that I had really good people behind me. I'd hired a president who, basically took all of the, the crap off of me. And, plus I knew where my strength lied. When it comes to operations and trying to squeeze an extra nickel out of the cost of a floppy disk, that's not really my strength. I could do it, but I didn't think it was the best thing for Sierra. Where I thought my strength lied was in mentoring and spreading knowledge between our different developers. And Sierra, internally, everybody would tell stories that Ken didn't like anybody except the software developers. And everybody felt I was prejudiced. And I would just answer and say, yep, you got it. I do care more about a software developer than a guy who's copying disks. And nothing against the guy who's copying disks, but it's not what makes Sierra competitive. It's not what people play at home. It's really, just something you got to do. Even the sales function, I used to get, fierce battles with the guy that ran our sales organization because even he didn't think I accorded as much respect as I did somebody that was building a game. And really, some of it was just, I wanted to be heads down, focused, working. We had 1,000 people, 700 of which were building games. And those were the people that I really wanted to spend all my time with. And they were spread around the world. And I spent all of my time riding on airplanes, going to meet the developers, and trying to get a sense of where the games are at, try to figure out what we could do to make the game more interesting, try to figure out if it was ever going to finish. That everybody who works on a game tends to be a perfectionist, or at least the kind of people that got hired at Sierra. And not only were everybody kind of a wannabe game designer, they were also
that's garbage.
Deeply caring about the product, and they wanted it to be right. But the problem is, and where I guess I worked well, was that I had a sense of the budget, and the marketing organization would tell me how many widgets, whatever the game was, they thought they could sell. And if we thought we could sell 100,000 copies, then I would mentally think I got around $4 or $5 per copy that I can afford to spend on development. So therefore, we got to build this game for $400,000, and that would be kind of the limit. And so I would be looking at the developers and trying to say no. I mean, really, a lot of my job, and it was tough, was that my job was really to say no. It's kind of like cut it off here. Because if you don't, it's never going to finish. And they'd say, but it's not perfect. And I would say, yeah, I know, but what are we going to do? Your budget is $400,000. And, and then there was, I guess, even kind of an internal anger, disappointment, sadness at the budgets Roberta would get. But everybody's budgets for the next game depended on the sales of their last game. So if Alo's last game sold 200,000 copies, then I would mentally think, okay, he's going to be 250 or 300 this round. So that gives him $1.2 million, and that's his budget. Meanwhile, somebody else might be on their first product, and I'll give them a $300,000 budget and say, go prove yourself. And, that's kind of how it worked. So what I would do is, at any point in time, especially toward the end, we would have 40 or 50 games in development. I mean, it would be crazy. And each development group, we were broken into, I think, 11 development groups toward the end. And I would visit each group, look at each game, and try to spread knowledge from one development group to another, and try to get a sense of where they were on budget. At the same time, they were trying to, convince me to boost the budget and get the games out the door. And so I'd say 99% of my time was focused on building games. And as far as coding, when I would try to code would be like on an airplane or something. I'd try to sneak something in, but as the company got bigger and bigger, there was less time for fun. And, in the very early days, I could actually code on games. And then later, there was no way. I mean, at the end of Sierra, it just couldn't happen. I spent all my life being jealous of the people that were building games. And wanted, even now when we kind of, Roberta and I built another game, Colossal Cave, people kept saying, are you going to do more games? Are you going to rebuild Sierra? And I'll say, heck no, are you kidding? I don't want to do that. At this point, all I want to do is kind of quietly write some code and live happily ever after. That's about it. So.
Now, you talked about marketing, and so I wanted to talk about the packaging of the games that you shipped.
Yeah.
Can you share a specific instance where the packaging choices that were made directly impacted the success or perception of the Sierra product?
Well, I mean, like all of them. I remember going to Japan and seeing the care and attention that the shopkeepers would put into. I mean, if you went into a store in Japan and bought something in a nice store, they would carefully fold and wrap, and everything was just perfect. The quality of the paper was better. The old Japanese magazines at that time, the computer magazines, were printed on a better quality of paper. And as soon as I saw that, I wanted it for Sierra. And so I wanted our boxes to be kind of an experience or a product in their own right. And so I was constantly looking for ways to make them kind of sexy. So we would emboss the covers. We would put tinfoil on the covers. We would do all kinds of crazy things. And, when the Beatles did the White Album, I would talk about, maybe we could just do a clean white box and just try to kind of shake things up. And I thought it would even sell with just a Sierra logo and, one of our designers' names, and do something fun. And then Richard Garriott, when we did Ultima, he kind of moved the notch up a little too, because Richard was, who went by Lord British at the time. I don't know if he still does, but he pushed me. He wanted this stupid cloth map in Ultima, and it was what I had to agree to in order to get the product. And I think the darn maps cost me like $5 a piece. And then they also had a bunch of demands for the box. But then when the product sold like crazy, I realized that, it wasn't just me that valued a great box, that consumers really cared, and they want a good box. And it's part of it's a sad thing that there are no big boxes like that anymore. And I see that there are groups around the internet that are collecting the old big boxes. And that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, well, manuals. I mean, part of what turned me on to Dynamics was when I saw their Red Baron game, or Aces in the Pacific, I think it was at the time, that had like a 400-page manual that went with it. And just the manual alone could give you so many hours of just leafing through the manual and having fun. So there was an understanding early on that a box was critical to the success. In fact, it's frustrating now when you're building a game, because you want to give people a map, you want to give them a reference card, and you can't do any of that. And with Steam, you maybe can, but with like PlayStation or Nintendo, there's not really concept of, what does Steam call them, DLCs or something like that, where you can do all this extra stuff. And there's no box. You can't print on the back of the box. It's just frustrating. You're suddenly stuck putting up a menu that says help or something. So.
Yeah, that's why I feel there is way too much hand-holding in games nowadays, because back in the day, you had to read the manual to know how to play the game. In order to learn the controls, you'd have to open the big box, get the manual, read the manual, and then you'd know what keys to push in order to play the game. But nowadays you have level 1 teaching you how to which keys to use, and then level 2 telling you the background story, and then level 3. And
distortion
so I prefer
and
to
green
get right
partitions
into the middle of
come
the
on,
action
dude.
instead of
you haven't looked at your inventory
getting all
once.
these levels that were the manual back in the day.
Some of that's due to digital distribution, and I don't know. I mean, it would be nice in that it's kind of cool that you get to keep 2/3 of the money these days as a developer. Back in my generation, the cost of packaging was so high that you would easily be out $15 for delivering the software to somebody. So it was, in my day, it was 2/3 of the cost for, if ultimately a product would sell at retail for, say, $50, I'd be getting maybe 30 for it, and I would have $15 or $16 into the package, and I would have $5 or so into development, and maybe there'd be 5 to 10 left for me. But in today's world, you get 2/3 of the money right up front, or 70%. So that part of it's good. That allows you to build a better product. When you could spend $12 a unit on development, you can do 3 times as much as when you could spend 4. So it's, plus now you're starting so close to the finish line. Like you talked about ChatGPT, it's also true that you can now find music online. You can generate music online these days. You can get a lot of graphics that you can download. You can get skeletons for dragons or about any character you can imagine, and then you're starting at least with a working underlying structure, and then you start polishing it up. So and you can work with people who aren't physically in your office.
My E-key doesn't work.
Suddenly you can search the whole world for the best you can get and not be bogged down by the people that live within 10 miles of the office. So, game developers, I wouldn't say have it easy, because the players are the ones that really won, because the simpler you make game development, the better the games can be. And so you start getting these enormous budgets and really good games.
Yeah, but nowadays game development for
Sorry, dude, I'm taking you out of here.
Takes years. When back in the day, for Sierra, it would take a year of production, or maybe big budget productions like Phantasmagoria, it would take 2 years because you kept on chasing your own tail in order to get the latest technology implemented into the game. So even though it's easier now to create a game, they spend more time creating said game.
Yeah, I hear about games with $100 million budget or $300 million budget. I think, boy, what I could have done with that, though. But although when you start getting that many people on a project, it's tough to make the game, fun, or to have a soul. My vision was always that playing a game should be like reading a book, where you connect with the author. And you really get, I felt multiple people on a project, especially if they had creative input, just watered down the final product. And I never wanted that. I always liked small teams with extreme power in the minds of, or some designer who really had the passion for the product. And even if they weren't the best musician, they weren't the best animator, they got to control what does the sound like, what does it look like, and just empower that person to build the product that they imagine, and then hope people connect with it. So that was always a day in, day out battle for me to get the product to feel like it was a Roberta Williams product or an Allo product, and not get watered down in any way.
Now, you talked about how easy it is to create or generate music nowadays in order to implement the music in the game. But back then, when you used composers, you also actively supported various sound cards. So you supported the Roland MT32 sound module at launch, and even bundled it with King's Quest 4 for a special price. How did this collaboration with Roland originate?
There was a time before music when all the computers had was a simple buzzer that you could click. And then at some point, I guess with the PC Junior from IBM, suddenly you had 3 buzzers in effect. But still, it wasn't like you had real music, and there was not clear where music was going to go. And so I started reading up on MIDI, which was kind of the music standard, and started trying to compose the music for our games using MIDI, which hadn't been done previously. And what happened somehow along the lines, I guess, as music was becoming more part of our business, and in fact, we wrote the drivers that Logitech first used. I remember they stole our drivers, and I was angry at them and threatened to sue them, and then we worked out some kind of a settlement. But we were always kind of on the forefront of music. And I remember even talking to Jobs about music on the Mac when they first did the Mac, and he mentioned that they were in kind of a messy situation. I never heard how resolved, where I guess the Beatles had the rights for music under the name Apple. And somehow they had threatened to sue Apple or something, and there was all kinds of controversy over whether or not the Mac could even do music. So we were kind of on the forefront of all of that.
Interesting how off it is there.
And I mentioned it at a board meeting, and one of my board members knew the founder and CEO of a company called Roland that was doing a lot of the keyboards and amplifiers for performing groups. And so he went on our board, Beckman, and I don't know. And there was internally, that's at the same time that synthesizers were starting to evolve. And the MT32 by Roland was a synthesizer, and we even actually released one under our name, and like you said, bundled it. But the problem with most of the synthesizers, you suddenly couldn't do speech. You couldn't do digital sound effects. And so there was kind of this tug of war between doing MIDI music and synthesizers, which could sound really good, and doing better sound cards internally that could do both music and accept MIDI and do speech. And that's kind of the path that won, was kind of the Logitech or sound card kind of direction. And at the time we supported the MT32, it really produced beautiful music, but it couldn't do any speech. But there was no speech in those days, so it didn't really matter. I don't know how it played out. We sold a lot of MT32s, and we also sold a Logitech or similar, Creative Labs, I think it was called at those days, probably a company. Yeah, it was Creative Labs, I think we went to war with for a while, and then wound up being one of their biggest supporters. But their sound card, I think, is what we were supporting toward the end. But ultimately, we just wound up writing it, adding a layer of abstraction. One of the nice things of using a game engine is that the game developer doesn't have to worry about it. We had a internal format for music and internal format for digital sound, and then we had a layer of abstraction that mapped it to whatever the real hardware was. So that was a different time.
So how many bundles did you sell? Because it was pretty expensive. It was like $549.
I don't know. It would have been like at least 10,000. It was probably 30 or 40,000. Sierra, it's weird that even like you and Israel had heard of Sierra Online. A kid from Pomona, and suddenly we had this worldwide business. And Yeah,
It's a little bit of a cheat
really
there.
had,
One to go to the bathroom
the
door,
best
but
distribution in the world for computer games at one point.
doesn't
in
make
time.
for good
We
TV,
were
does
the,
it?
Valve of those days, so or the Activision, and should have stayed that way. But it crashed and burned at some point, but that's toward the end of the story. So.
Now, the Sierra Network, which launched in 1989, showcased your forward-thinking vision for connected online experiences, a vision which was also reflected in the renaming of the company to Sierra Online.
Mm-hmm.
Back
the timing of that's a little bit wrong, isn't it?
Online was something that people actually were
No.
doing. So my question is, what made you so confident that online was the future, especially when the internet was just getting started and was mainly available in colleges? Modems were slow, and most people hadn't even imagined connecting their computers to anything.
Yeah, well, I remember Sierra grew out of, I had my business name prior to starting Sierra was Online Systems. And it was because I was a specialist, I guess you'd say, or I was kind of the guru in LA on connecting 1,000 terminals to a mainframe and writing software for them. So when we formed Sierra, it seemed natural to make the name Sierra Online because we were in the Sierra Mountains and it had previously been named Online Systems. But we hit there was some public company or something named Online Systems. And when we took venture capital and searched for the name Online Systems, it wasn't possible. So we named it Sierra Online. And I was always enamored by the idea of linking people together for gaming.
Well done, Larry.
And I also always have what I call a crawl, walk, run strategy, where in doing new things, I like to pick something that is brain dead simple. And once you do that, then you do something a little harder, and then you do something a little harder. So for online gaming, it seemed intuitive to me to start with card games, where you had a real obvious game mechanic and could build on it. And then, the story's in the book, but I happened to be talking to my grandma one day, and she was whining about being stuck home alone, and she was getting to the age where she couldn't go anywhere anymore. And I, just suddenly had this inspiration and said, well, what if my grandma was stuck at home could pick up a card game 24 hours a day, 7 days a week against another person? And, today that's kind of super obvious, but in those days, nobody would have believed it. And so I went to Sprint with that concept. And, I mocked up a little box that I called the Constant Companion. And I said, here's a little box that we could sell to seniors. And then it would allow them to play cards against any other senior anywhere in the world. And could Sprint provide the network? And immediately they said, sure, that'd be great. And gave me a bunch of free network time, which at the time, I'm trying to remember, it was on some standard called X25 or something that would have a local presence in a city. And it was, there was no concept about it outside of colleges. So Sprint said yes, and then I went to some hardware company, and now I'm kind of blank on who it was, and said, I need some computers to give seniors. And, was it NEC? I don't remember who, but I got a bunch of free computers. And so with a bunch of free computers and free network time, I needed some seniors. So I found, I think it was like 90 people that were like in their 80s and 90s, and put these computers in their houses and wrote the software to connect them. Actually, Al Lowe, I think, wrote some of the first software, and was using our game development engine. And the seniors fell in love instantly. In those days, our servers would overheat almost immediately, and the network would crash as soon as you got 50 or 60 people playing anything. And, we had a lot of learning to do, and we didn't know what we were getting into, but it just exploded. I mean, the seniors, when the system would go down, would just sit there and keep banging on the keyboard, hoping it would come back. I mean, it was so revolutionary to anything they had done before. And they knew they were part of something special. And then we decided we'd do a broader vision and start adding other games. And in my crawl, walk, run strategy, we moved up to games for kids with something called Boogers, and then we did. I actually wanted to do flight simulators, and these were. I mean, you got to imagine this was a 1200 baud modem, and when the world moved up to 2400 baud, which is I don't know how you'd compare it to today's network speeds, but
I'm taking my advice.
I mean, it's horrible. But we were doing flight simulators. We did Red Baron on this network, and then we started doing gambling games, trying to target adults, and then it became obvious that I had a tiger by the tail, and this thing was going to really go big. And so I did a financing. I went out on a tour amongst the investment bankers and raised $50 million for the Sierra network. And it kind of exploded to, I mean, it sounds like a tiny number now, but we had 10,000 paying customers. And at that point that I talked to Bill Gates, and he wanted to invest, and AT&T wanted to invest. And then I tried to get the two of them to partner with us, but each of them wanted to be on top. And I wound up partnering it with AT&T, and I rigged a deal where Sierra was going to be a developer for the network, and AT&T was going to run it. And it should have worked, but Sierra's business was kind of exploding at that point in time. And it became, and one of the things that went wrong was the guy that I brought in to run the Sierra network really didn't like Sierra. And I don't blame him. He wanted his own show. He wanted to be a CEO of a company. And so he kind of started trying to figure out how to put games on the network that weren't from Sierra, and started actively kind of trying to not work with Sierra. And the internet came along, and he kind of made the decision to stop adding customers and start moving the whole thing over to the internet. And instead of wanting to use our in-house coding language, our SCI, wanted to rebuild the thing from the ground up in C. And that was kind of a fiasco. And I was opposed, but I was running a large operation, and I really kind of had to trust that he knew where he was going, but it didn't. I mean, they never released another game as far as I know after that decision was made. Basically, I got sidetracked, and it all kind of nosedived at that point. And if you combine a small company and a big company, what you get is a big company. And big companies move at the speed of molasses. And whereas the Sierra network had been this insanely fast-growing, highly creative, technologically leading company, it became a disaster that did nothing with far more people and a far bigger budget. So that was sad. And then we sold the company, and I think I never heard really kind of what happened. I think the Sierra network was sold to
whatever
AOL,
it says. I don't care what you say.
And
It's spelled adjective wrong.
So I'm not sure whatever happened to it. I know it died.
Move to man in green shirt.
But it was probably the greatest thing I ever did, and should have been huge, but wasn't.
Now, we talked about
that first
all
command
these
was already in
technologies
flight.
that Sierra implemented in their products, but from a technical perspective, how did you and your teams evaluate emerging hardware?
Nope.
Things like CD-ROM drives and sound cards, in order to determine whether it was worth integrating them into Sierra games.
I told
because,
you. I already told you how to do this.
For example, I interviewed Mark Siebert, and he talked about the fact that he composed music on the MT32, but most people didn't have an MT32. So that means that at Sierra, you guys implemented the technologies while taking a huge risk in case those technologies wouldn't be adopted by the public?
We were, because we kind of owned the industry in those days, all the hardware companies would come to us very early in development. And so we always had kind of a sneak peek at everything that was coming. And because we used a game engine, most of our competitors that were coming along at that point hadn't evolved a game engine yet. They were having to code to the hardware that existed. We could move much faster, like on music, on graphics, on anything else, because we were using our own game engine. We could move super quickly. When it came to music, you just drop in a different. We were able to build a game and quickly get it running on lots of different platforms. And sometimes, we would look at things and say, that isn't going to happen. There was I saw a picture of me recently from, it was probably like 1992, wearing a VR headset. And I remember putting it on, and the hardware company was willing to give us money to build games for it. And I decided to pass because it didn't feel like it was, mainstream ready. I remember thinking it's going to be 10 years before this thing is really a product. And now here we are, 30 years later, 40 years later, and it's just now really kind of becoming a marketplace. So there was a little bit of it which was us making a decision what was going to go and what wasn't going to go. I remember when mice came out. Mice at the time were a controversial thing. Were they going to make it or not? And and touch screens. Should we support touch screens? There were all these decisions kind of constantly coming in, and decisions had to be made. And sometimes we made bad ones, and sometimes we made wise ones. But at least we were a big enough company to afford to be wrong once in a while, and we had a engine that allowed us to easily adapt to different platforms. Hardware was evolving super quick in those days, and not all hardware made it. We were working on ColecoVision and VIC-20, and we worked Atari. What was it? There was Atari personal computer. There were all these things that we worked on, but we were able to get something up and running quickly because all we had to do was adapt our engine, and then a whole flood of games came behind it. And and it was good. So we were able to take bets, take some hits, and people expected Sierra to do that. One of the things that I always said was that, leaders lead and followers follow. And it was up to us to lead, and we'd do something. Even when LucasArts started doing adventure games, it was pretty obvious they were copying us. And the market doesn't reward those who follow. It's really who gets there first. And so I was highly focused on trying to get
That's
there
a bad
first.
response.
So,
you should say you can't do that here or something. The AI is not going to understand that at all. It thinks that you're telling it to sit, and then you're telling it there's no time to sit. It's going to get lost.
Yeah, it's true. I can't say I didn't allow them. I deliberately based the company in a place where there weren't competitors, and I would not hire somebody that worked at a competitor, and really wanted to draw a wall between us and other companies. I wouldn't hire games.
I think this is actually
outside.
Supposed to be Ken.
The only game we really did during my tenure that came from outside the company was Half-Life, and that was because I needed a first-person shooter. I could see that market was big, and we didn't have one. And Gabe Newell happened to work in my office on the right day, and he clearly knew what he was doing. And that was an easy decision, but I didn't like the fact that it was being developed outside of Sierra. But I did tie down the rights so that we would own Half-Life, somehow later he got the rights back after I was gone. But it was always important to me to own everything we did.
I sent Kent that
and
article.
I would, and that's part of what crashed Sierra was after it was sold. They started, they kind of took on the mentality, let's fire all the internal developers and become a publisher. And there's an argument for that, but it wasn't the way I ran the business. So, and when they did it, it didn't work, and it kind of crashed and burned the whole thing. But we were definitely heavy internally in development. So, but no, I did not like. It would be wrong. I mean, because people that work for me might have seen something in a competitor product that they liked and wanted to copy, and that would suddenly turn us into a follower instead of a leader. And I don't do that.
Very well. Now, speaking of first-person shooters, in 1991, John Romero visited Sierra's Oakhurst offices.
Doom.
What were your initial impressions of its software's approach to game development and business in general?
This should be interesting.
Well, I should have paid more attention. It was funny in that I was a cocky kid and I thought I knew everything. And I'm still probably cockier than I should be and still think I know more than I do. But I should have listened to those guys. They showed up and they were and they were 4 kids in a van, or 3 kids, whatever it was. But they kind of looked like like I looked 50 years ago. They were kids with T-shirts and ripped jeans and living in a van, and had this goofy philosophy of giving away software, kind of give them the razor and sell them the blades kind of thing to sell additional levels. And I didn't understand how that could work, and I didn't pay attention. And then they wanted to sell me the company for $1 million, and I agreed. We both thought $1 million was fair, but I needed to do it using stock, and they wanted cash, and that wasn't going to work because I would have had to expense it all at one time, and I think we were a public company at that point, so it would have mucked up our financials, and I was just nervous because there was really no company there. There was these guys, and they were clearly kind of free spirits. And I thought, I'm going to give them $1 million. I'm going to get this game that doesn't use distribution, doesn't go in a box, doesn't really fit my philosophy. And they're hoping that they can make more levels and distribute them. But I think at the time they were even mailing people floppies that don't think they were doing download. And it just didn't kind of feel right. And I passed on it. And it was one of the dumber things I ever did. But who could have known that John Romero would become John Romero and John Carmack? And
John Carmack.
How could I have known that?
Freaking genius.
I should have done that deal. So,
those guys are awesome.
I talked to Romero recently when I was writing my book. And I'm
going to give this to it, guys.
It was funny that he called me and said I had
why acidic bar counter is not a command. The AI is just not going to catch on to that.
And that he remembered every word said.
I hate cheating for it, but...
we were. And I said, John, just rewrite the chapter. We'll do it your way. And he did. So when you read that chapter out of my book, you're listening to John Romero, not me. So.
Well, I read both books because in his book, he also mentions this.
All right, I kind of want to go back and hear this because I was busy screwing around with the AI.
They were levels and distribute them. But I think at the time they were even mailing people floppies that don't think they were doing download. And it just didn't kind of feel right. And I passed on it. And it was one of the dumber things I ever did. But who could have known that John Romero would become John Romero and John Carmack? And I mean, how could I have known that I should have done that deal? So, I talked to Romero recently when I was writing my book, and I had written the whole thing up, and it was funny, and that he called me and said I had screwed it all up and remembered it wrong, and that he has perfect memory. and that he remembered every word said and exactly where we were. And I said, John, just rewrite the chapter. We'll do it your way. And he did. So when you read that chapter out of my book, you're listening to John Romero, not me. So.
Well, I read both books because in his book, he also mentions this meeting. So I know that you both describe the same things in both books. So you're fine.
Yeah, no, he remembers it better than me. He remembers going to our house and everything else. I remember none of that, but oh well. I'll defer to his version of events. So.
Now, at that same meeting, it seemed like you were more impressed with their shareware revenue than with their tech, with the tech they used for Wolfenstein. Do you think that Sierra could have adopted the shareware model for, experimental or smaller projects?
Could we have? Sure. But I just didn't get it. I mean, I just was dumb. I just did not understand what they were going for. I didn't realize I was going to wind up being the business model that revolutionized the industry. So that was a lack of vision on my part. I was ahead of a lot of trends, and that one I just didn't see, and I should have. And the whole selling them a game and selling them weapons and selling, the add-ons within a game, I didn't see that one coming. So, I probably would have if Sierra had stuck around another year or two, but we sold just as the internet came on the scene. So I assume I would have jumped on those bandwagons, but certainly when I met with, Carmack and Romero that day, I hadn't figured it out yet, and I didn't understand shareware. It made no sense to me.
You got the whiskey already.
That was a miss.
But if the acquisition had gone through, how would you have envisioned integrating them into the company? Would you have encouraged them to focus exclusively on shooters, or would you leverage their technology into the Sierra franchises?
I would have done it their way, and I was always a big believer that you either have to do something somebody's way or not at all. That with a talented person, even when they're wrong, you got to support them. And
that's good advice, Ken.
Yeah, I would have done it their way, and I would have let them do it, and I would have talked to other teams about what they were doing. I might have tried to encourage them to somehow put the functionality into SCI so that we can use it in other games. But I wouldn't have tried.
I wonder if he's going to talk about basically the violence.
There was a side of me that didn't like first-person shooters. I really, there's kind of a, I don't know what you would say, innocent side of me that thinks that if you give a young kid a gun,
there it is,
simulate shooting at other people, that when they grow up they're gonna, be desensitized to shooting at other people. I just didn't like that. It always felt wrong to me to give people in a game realistic weapons. Somehow I was okay with the idea of like a Red Baron game, going up and doing dogfighting, because you don't see blood, you don't see, you don't hear screams. You
see that?
Shouldn't. Because in real life, if they're dogfighting, you're shooting at real people in planes.
It doesn't understand how to get out of that situation.
I guess for whatever reason it didn't offend me, but we start getting to Wolfenstein or Doom or something, and you're really shooting at human-type characters with a gun. I don't know. Ultimately I'm building games for other people to play, not for me to play. So I try to look the other way on those issues, but it really did kind of grind me that you're training kids to shoot weapons, and that's not what I would do. And so, from a business perspective, I wanted it, but and I did back down ultimately with Half-Life, because the market realities. Ultimately, if you're going to be in the business, you got to be in the business. So, that was certainly also weighing on my mind. That it wasn't real clear to me that this was a business I wanted to be in. So, But then when I passed and they started making a lot of money, then all of a sudden I realized, well, so much for that. I should be there. So.
Well, but you did have other revenue streams with handbooks, which apparently handbooks were a solid revenue stream for Sierra.
We're stuck on the screen.
I need you to
sure.
tell me the truth on this one.
Yeah.
Were they created purely to help stuck players, or did the team intentionally design tougher puzzles, knowing it might force players into buying one?
No, we never. We did have a very high ethical standard. I would never have intentionally left a puzzle in the game just to sell a hit book, but I did love the hit book revenue. And we tried to do clever things to get people their money. I mean, we did the little red plastic to hide the hints. We did, I wanted to do scratch and sniff kind of stuff where you'd scratch off to get the hint. We did hints upside down. I think we did a lot of different clever ways of doing it. We even did a 900 number. And,
yeah.
But, so
I got my butt kicked for calling that.
Take the money. And, but there was real money there. We actually got a good business out of doing hint books. So,
and it was a great way to fight piracy, because even people with pirated copies of the games would need hint books.
Would buy the hint book. I know we used to joke that there were some games where we sold more hint books than games. And I don't think that was ever actually true, but it felt like it at times, because we did sell a lot of hint books.
Now, look at this, he's stuck on this.
Wow. And then the internet came along, so walkthroughs were publicly available for free.
Move on.
Yeah.
Stop with this.
You can ask ChatGPT.
You have no idea how many instructions are there to try and avoid it from doing that,
it's
and
weird
it doesn't
how
care.
ChatGPT can do. I just use it before I'll go to like Adobe site to look up something. I go to ChatGPT and ask them, how to do obscure things with, Photoshop or something. It knows. It's weird. So anyway, go ahead.
I like that Ken is talking about ChatGPT while ChatGPT is playing a game that Ken is the producer and programmer
sometimes
of.
It gives you the wrong answer, and then you need to tell it that you're talking about the latest version, or that he's wrong. And then he's pretty okay with him being wrong. He says, "Oh, you're right. Here's the correct answer."
Yeah, I've had that experience. Well, yeah, because software is always being updated and the UIs are changing. But anyway, next up.
So we talked about Sierra games being published over here in Israel. So when did the need for localization first come up for Sierra's games? Was it driven by a team member's suggestion, or was it part of your vision to expand the reach of Sierra titles globally?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I pushed that, but I would say that I was pushed into it. And that in the very beginning, our French distributor wanted us to do a French version.
All right, well, we're going to cut it here. I think we've been playing it long enough. I want to work on the prompts a little bit, and I'm going to keep watching this great interview.
We did an acquisition
but there it is, ChatGPT playing Leisure Suit Larry. We've made it pretty reasonably far.
Great distribution.
We were able to get inside the bar. We were able to get whiskey. We were able to get the rose. In the bathroom, we saw the Ken sent me. We haven't solved any big puzzles, for example, getting into this room or something like that. Multi-step puzzles. So lots to work on.
The game so it was fairly easy to add, and then we started changing our game engine to make the